Hey, welcome back to Overhead Athletics. Today we're going to talk about getting on top of the baseball. Getting on top of the baseball is one of those traditional or historical coaching terms that we tell athletes when they're slinging the ball out and around. And a lot of times coaches are really good at saying, that doesn't look right, doesn't look like you're getting on top of the ball, but we need to be better about how we describe this to our athletes, but also about how we start to train it so that athletes can get into better positions in the throw and move more efficiently. Thinking of getting on top of the baseball, basically what we're referring to is coming from behind the baseball as opposed to kind of scooping under it. A lot of times athletes supinate and scoop under the baseball almost like they're going to throw a cutter or a slider based on what they do earlier in the throw. It's very important to consider how the pelvis loads and then how the arm moves. There's two big reasons why athletes don't get on top of the baseball, even though I don't particularly like the term, because the term really doesn't describe exactly what happens in the throw. It's not completely accurate, but it's a term that's thrown out a lot of times and athletes don't really understand what it means. I think we need to be a little bit more descriptive in our terminology and vernacular so that we can be more effective as coaches. So getting on top of the baseball, basically what we're referring to is, hey, we don't want to see you scooping under the ball and kind of turning this way. And just telling an athlete that doesn't do anything to correct the mechanical flaw or inefficiency. What we need to look for as coaches is first, how well do they close the back pelvis? How well do they rotate away from the target? And that's a hip hinge, that's an internal rotation or a pelvis that rotates around and away from the target, as well as a hip hike. So that front of the hip comes up, the chest comes forward, butt goes back at the same time that they rotate away. At the same time they're rotating away from the target. As you can see here in this video of this thrower, he lifts the front of the hip, he turns away from the target and he flexes into that back hip. What that does is turns on the back hip musculature in combination with the outside of the hip, lateral hip musculature, and even a little bit of the front of the hip musculature as the athlete starts to move down the mound. By staying closed a little bit longer, that prevents this casting motion out and around the body that leads to the arm dipping under the ball and cutting the pitch or slicing the pitch. So first we need to see, does the athlete get into that position? Do they close the hips? And then do they maintain that closed hip position as they go towards the target? Once we've looked at the pelvis and seen, can the pelvis stay closed as the athlete goes towards the target, we also need to consider what the arm does. That's the second big contribution to not getting behind the ball or not staying quote unquote on top of the ball. I have a big problem with any sort of coaching cue that just forces an athlete to get higher with their arm or throw over the top to get on top of the ball, when in fact really what they need to do is stay closed through their pelvis. You'll see guys like Nolan Ryan, Randy Johnson, they quote unquote stay on top of the ball, yet they have a very lateral arm position at release. How is that possible? It's possible because they stay closed through their pelvis for so long and they load their arm the right way. So we call these attractor states, meaning they're the stable components of a movement that are transferable across context. So you can do the same thing on grass, you can do the same thing on a pitching mound, you do the same thing on a crow hop from the outfield to make the throw as efficient as possible, save energy, and also produce the maximum amount of force and power. So moving into that second domain there, which is the arm action, the attractor state here is approximation during acceleration. So as you're accelerating, meaning moving linearly and angularly rotating towards the target, you should be accelerating, you're bringing the ball in close to your center of rotation, then out and around. And that's why you see elite level pitchers with such flexed elbow positions like Jacob deGrom, as you can see on the screen here, Aroldis Chapman. Those elbow positions are because they're approximating or bringing the ball in as they go towards the target. And they've closed their hip, they've rotated around the hip. That's our first attractor state, rotate around the hip. Hip hike of the front side of the pelvis, flexion and internal rotation away, as well as brought the ball in towards their center of rotation as they come through. That allows them to stay, as traditional pitching coaches would say, on top of the baseball, protect their elbow, and their shoulder. It's much better to teach how to, or much more efficient to teach how to load into the hip and how to sequence the arm action earlier in the throw than just telling somebody from a bucket, get on top of the baseball, get on top of the baseball, and then having the athlete artificially change their arm slot in order to get into the right position. If you like this video, make sure to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. We'll see you guys in the next one.